Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to our last board meeting of the semester for the committee, policy committee. I will call this meeting to order at 3:32 p.m. on December the 21st. We will have two sort of staff discussions around policy GCIDA, which is around staff travel and reimbursements. As well as policy KDA around access to public records. And it doesn't look like we have any, just check to make sure we don't have any public comments. No, today, but and then for we have two compliance reports up, which is around sustainability and anaphylaxis, and sort of identifications and treatments in schools. And for our presenters today, if you could keep your presentations to 20 minutes, that will allow for us to have robust conversations and also leave some time for us to have some conversations about the compliance reports as well. And so with that being said, I will pass it over to the folks who will be talking about staff travel and reimbursements.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Courtney.
How are you doing?
Good.
I think I am sharing my screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to talk through policy GCIDA, staff travel reimbursement. So a little bit of background on this. This is not the first time we've had this discussion. So we initially, or actually prior to that, this was just a sort of I guess a document that existed in finance, a reference document that exists in finance with regards to staff travel and reimbursement. It wasn't something that was an official board policy, so we thought to correct that by having an official policy. So this came up on last year's calendar, and we had a few conversations. We had the policy review team conversation, and we got some feedback from that. And we also had the policy committee conversation, and we got some feedback from that. And at first reader, the discussion was that we would take this back to the drawing board, so to speak, to incorporate a lot of the feedback that we received, do some more research, work with legal as well on the language. And that's what we've brought to fore this time around. So it's a much different version of the draft policy from what we had initially. A lot of the elements are very similar. It's just a lot more detailed, a lot more refined. We took a lot of the feedback that we received to heart. Try to make it more staff friendly, I should say, as much as you can with a policy like this, which is really about guidance and regulation and safeguarding the interests of the district as well. So this is what we're presenting for review. You have the draft policy and regs as well. So I'm going to start to go through what we have today. Sorry. So the purpose, Board of Commissioners supports reasonable expenditures for business travel by employees in furtherance of educational mission and operational needs of city schools. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in one of the other slides. We really want to make sure that it's centered around the benefit of the district and education, that there is a reason for travel when it's initiated and reimbursement. So some of the definitions, I'm not going to read through them all, but I'm going to highlight a couple that are important based on some feedback that we received before. So what we categorize as business travel is travel for official city schools business, including attending business meetings, conferences, and/or training for professional development purposes. And that can include both local and out-of-town travel. Also, employees eligible for reimbursement. This was a discussion item when we brought this up previously as well. So we're specifying that full-time employees, excluding contractual, temporary, and part-time employees, except in the instances where the contractual temp or part-time employees have received prior authorization. So outside of prior authorization, it applies to full-time employees. The other definitions I want to highlight are local travel and out-of-town travel. So the measuring stick essentially being 50 miles from City Schools building, 200 East North Avenue. And for out-of-town travel, anything outside of that 50-mile radius from City Schools. So the policy standards. Employees are eligible for reimbursement for travel expenses directly related to the business travel for official city schools business, subject to advance approval requirements and other procedures set forth in the accompanying administrative regs. Employees conducting official business must exercise due care and prudence when incurring expenses for business travel. All resources should be spent wisely, so decisions to engage in business travel should be based on determination that spending the resources meets the educational mission and operating needs of city schools and best serves the student body. That language is pretty important, I think, in terms of outlining the need for and the parameters around the policy. Also, city schools will not reimburse for loss of personal funds or property during business travel. Reimbursement for mileage will be the rate established and published by IRS. So we have a set reference with regards to the rates used for business travel. Commuting mileage and other costs cannot be reimbursed. That means that there's no reimbursement for travel to and from your residence to work. And that leads to the second point here. For the purposes of this policy and the accompanying reg, in no case shall an employee's home or residence be designated as a city school's work location, even when the employee has an approved teleworking agreement pursuant to policy GCLE. F, unless pre-approved by the CFO or designee, city schools only will reimburse employees for meal expenses incurred while on business travel. In circumstances where meals are reimbursable, city schools will not reimburse an employee for the purchase of alcoholic beverages, which are the sole responsibility of the employee. So there is no circumstance under which alcohol is reimbursable. If business travel involves student field trips, the protocols for policy IOJ and accompanying administrative regs also apply to reimbursable travel expenses. Next, we have the implementation strategies. So guidelines for business travel approval and reimbursement set forth in the CEO's regs. Provisions of collective bargaining agreements may also be applicable to business travel. So we wanted to make sure that there was language in there that accounted for negotiated agreements with our bargaining units. CFO acting as a designee for purposes of the policy and the accompanying regs is responsible for developing and maintaining forms for seeking approval of business travel and reporting expenses, as well as issuing additional guidance to supplement this policy and the accompanying administrative regs. So this language here is to open the door for some training and support for staff on adhering to the policy and the regulations. And I want to dig in on that a little bit because we're sort of in an intermediary period with where we are right now with our new ERP system and implementation. That's going to change some of the forms and documentations and processes associated with this policy and travel reimbursement. The new software that we're going to be using will eliminate some of the paper forms that we have right now and e-forms that we use. And it'll also make it easier for folks to submit documentation associated with reimbursement. So we wanted to leave some opening in the language for us to make those adjustments going forward without having to reword the actual policy itself. We can make those changes in the regs without impacting the policy. But we do want to be accommodating for that, both where we are right now and where we intend to be within the next 2 years with the new ERP system. C, the CFO may authorize reasonable expenditures and reimbursements that involve extenuating circumstances beyond those contemplated in the accompanying regulation. This was also based on some prior feedback where we wanted a little more flexibility in the language to be able to deal with situations that are unanticipated or that we don't cover in the current language. And the CFO will provide technical support to traveler approvers and other staff regarding implementation of this policy and the accompanying reg. Travel approvers are expected to review the policy and accompanying reg prior to approving any employee request for business travel. So this language is about making sure that we are providing training and support for folks who are going to be approving travel requests, and also that they are to adhere to the policy and regulations when reviewing those requests. So on this last slide, we have the summary of the details from the reg. The regs cover the review and approval process for out-of-town travel. So that states, for example, that the travel request form needs to be submitted at least 15 days prior to travel. There's language about how we treat the transition between fiscal years, meaning, for example, you're going to be traveling on July 2nd, but you still need to submit the form 15 days before. So you submit it in the prior fiscal year, noting within the submission that you're going to be using funds from the subsequent fiscal year. so that it's dealt with there as well. Again, with our new system, we should be able to deal with those sort of like quirks a little bit better, but we're building those into the regs right now for consideration as well. So reimbursable transportation for out-of-town travel covers some of the different modes associated with travel, and also some language about using the least expensive logical fare. So, making concessions that air travel may not always be the best, or giving some concessions for folks who need to find alternate means of travel for whatever reason, but also keeping that within the scope of finding what's a logical expense or an expense, how we can mitigate increased expenses through that process. There's language about lodging and what can be used in terms of the rates associated with lodging, and we're specifying the GSA rates. But there's room for exception based on conference hotel rates. There were examples we were given in feedback sessions or conversations about, what if folks are attending an event at a hotel, but the rate is slightly higher than the approved rate? Does that mean they need to go somewhere else, pay for travel to the hotel, Uber back and forth, or whatever the case is? So we added in language to make some concessions for those circumstances where we'd evaluate the cost-benefit analysis of the increase based on where they'd be staying for the conference if it's within the same hotel, as opposed to having to pay transportation costs on top of the nightly rate at another hotel. So all that's sort of designed to be a bit more staff friendly. Also added in some language for how we will accept payment as well for staff in circumstances where they're unable to pay some of those items up front. So there are few concessions in the regs, and we're going to continue through the process to look at feedback and have discussions with folks on what's been put out there. Again, some of these updates are newer. Some of it folks have seen before because it's based on the feedback and conversations that we've had last year and in some of the review sessions. And then we're going to bring it back for first reader on January 25th. So, any questions?
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'll ask my fellow board commissioners, do you have any questions for the minute?
So, Mr. Chair, my only question, and Courtney, great, thank you for being here in the presentation, is how fluid can this be given COVID? So things like, where's your homeschool if we're on remote learning? So specifically and maybe this policy doesn't impact this, for itinerant teachers who would be reimbursed for things like mileage for doing their job. Are there spaces and places in here that address and allow for that fluidity?
So there was an iteration of this where we put some of the COVID-specific concessions in the policy, and we ended up deciding against that and trying to keep some of the COVID items specifically in COVID-related, conversations, I would say. So there are going to be things that impact the policy, and the policy is worded in such a way that will allow for discretionary concessions to be made based on, CFO judgment or a CEO judgment, or et cetera. But it's not worded specifically as COVID in the policy. Again, COVID being hopefully, a temporary item, not something that's going to be ingrained into the policy long term.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner James. Commissioner McFadden, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. Forgive my earbud just fell out. Forgive that noise. But no, I don't have any questions. Thanks. Thank you for tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My only question for you is around the IRS sort of reimbursement rate, and particularly does that change based on sort of geographic location? I'm just not aware of that rate.
Yeah, it is updated periodically, not as frequently and as specific as like the GSA rates for hotels, but it is updated periodically. I think in our current time, or at least my time in city schools, I've probably seen it change twice. It was like initially like I think 50 cents, then like probably 52 and like 56 cents per mile now. So it's not you know, wildly reactive, but it is sort of like a source of constancy, I guess is the right word, but it's like a source that we can rely on and other jurisdictions rely on as well, that's consistent, you know, for using reimbursements or issuing reimbursements.
Great, thank you. And yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to get at is also that, like, is there a, is this the best metrics for us or the most consistent and status quo? And is there a better way, like, to take more into account sort of our specific sort of equities matters? For example, like different states things associated with it. So like it is the best one for us, or is it just the one that's standard?
Yeah. Yeah, in reviewing the rate, we didn't see any reason why the rate would not be applicable for us in Baltimore City. There was nothing specific about it that seemed to, you know, ring any bells or concerns with how we reimburse travel here as opposed to anywhere else. And the rate was very reasonable within the range of what we see in other jurisdictions. So there were no concerns with regards to equity.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right. If there are no other questions, we will move on to our next presentation.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Chief Sivan.
Hi, Josh Sivan, Chief Legal Officer, and I'm joined by
Andre.
Hi, had trouble with my volume. I'm Andre Riley, the Executive Director of Communications.
And we're here to talk about the access to public records, policy and regulation. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, run through this, and then we'll both be here for questions. Here, I just wanted to emphasize at the outset, and we'll go into it in more detail, these are largely technical corrections to update to new laws and to practices that we've already had in place, and we want to take the opportunity to codify in policy and regulation. So here are the strategic priorities implicated. And then we wanted to start off with just an overview of what this policy and regulation are about. This is about people's right to know and participate in government decision-making, and also consistency with federal law as well as state law, and particularly the Maryland Public Information Act. And really, if you remember nothing, the importance of this is about compliance with the requests we get under the Public Information Act. So just a brief bit of background on the Public Information Act. This is an act that balances the public's right to access government information with other policies that respect the privacy or confidentiality of certain pieces of information. Basically, anyone can request records, and I really mean anyone, and they may inspect any public record. They don't have to explain what their reason is, and they get that access unless an exception applies. It applies to existing records. There's not a requirement to create or compile new records or to perform any analysis on records. And it's our obligation to conduct a search reasonably calculated to uncover documents. And the reasonableness of this is an important piece of the act. There's some exceptions to disclosure, which we look and make sure we are complying with. And some of these are mandatory and some of them are discretionary. So if a state or federal law bars disclosure, like in particular for us, student records, FERPA, if personnel records with certain exceptions, medical records, attorney-client records, that's why I'm often involved in this, my office is often involved. Confidential information, like a vendor submitting us their staff's resumes. There's a discretionary exception for deliberative process, meaning we're formulating a recommendation up to the CEO and that process. There's also privacy of home addresses and phone numbers of public employees, although notably not their city schools' phone numbers. And then testing materials. If we're giving a test, the answer key, a student can't do a Public Information Act request for the test and the test results while they're preparing for a test. summary of some statistics on the number of Public Information Act requests we've gotten from year to year. We've seen a bit of a dip due to the pandemic, but this also doesn't count for, and I think we should start the number of pages we have to produce. So some of these that are just one on this list are very complex responses with multiple email searches or reviewing a huge contract file. So this is the numbers, but there's also more depth to this data in terms of the complexity of the request, and the request complexity has gone up over time. So the purposes of our revisions, as I mentioned, we last updated this. Well, I didn't mention that we last updated this in 2015. I did mention that we want to align with recent legislative changes. Some of the key ones are there was a Act HB 183 in 2021 that is really about proactive disclosure, and we'll get to that, as well as clarifying the authority of the Public Access Ombudsman and the Public Information Act Compliance Board, which are both state agencies which are charged with reviewing disputes in certain situations about public information. There's also recent legislation around police reform that specifies some particular provisions with respect to police investigative records. And then there have been updates to the Attorney General's Public Information Act Manual. We've also made a number of recent revisions to our own policies and regulations that we wanted to make sure we align, specifically around data sharing and procurement. And we also wanted to clarify for consistency with our current practices, which particularly stress cross-office collaboration and responding to that. Mr. Riley and I and others try to come together to really make sure that we are thinking strategically and also thinking about the many different offices that could have information relevant to a request, so we can provide a prompt and timely response. So I mentioned that new legislation in 2021 really it emphasized that school districts and other public agencies should put information to the extent to which they can, make it available upon request. And so we already had a list of general information documents in the policy, and we just have expanded it and clarified it. And so these, I'm not going to go through the list, but these are some of the information that's already up there and that we make available immediately on request. And most of it, if not all of it, is actually up on our website. One piece that particularly people are often interested in is the annually updated roster of employees' names and titles and salaries. Another is budget information. And surprisingly, people sometimes submit Public Information Act requests for our policies, and we can always say they're right up there on board docs, but that's what this part of the policy is about. We also then clarified that and encourage really applicants to review our website and the State Department of Education website. We are absolutely happy in a MPA request to respond that it's already up on the website, but we want to make sure that requesters, sometimes they don't always know that it's there. And so this just explains how we'll do and how we'll work for general information documents. Then in the proposed revisions, we've also referenced more clearly legal rules for specific types of documents. So we've explained and aligned with our policy and regulation, the rules for people who are requesting procurement records. We also explained around the rules for metadata in records, how requests for electronic records work, and also personnel and student records. And here's where we reference the investigative records for Baltimore City School Police, which are subject to the recent legislation that I discussed, and we've already received some requests under that new regulation for certain information from police investigative records. Then we also, this has been our practice and in other agencies during the pandemic, and we wanted to just put in a provision, as Mr. Devasay said earlier, we don't want to have a COVID-specific provision, but we do want to have a general sense that if there is an emergency situation that causes schools and offices to close, it may take longer to fulfill requests. The Attorney General's office actually had this up on their website, so we've tried and really have consistently moved forward with Public Information Act requests in the pandemic, but we just wanted to make this acknowledgement as part of the policy and regulation. Then there are a couple pieces just specifying when people can inspect records, when they will be available to it. We also are clarifying that when a written request, the request under the law needs to have enough of a description that we can understand the request. And so we just wanted to alert people if we don't have that specificity, we may follow up with them for clarification. And also, we have an obligation under the law within 10 working days to give a response to a request or tell how long it will take to respond. And we just wanted to clarify what we strive to do there is to give a partial response. So if we can take that 10 days and get the response done, or at least partially done, that often gives the immediate information or a start to the information that the requester is looking for. And then another piece where we wanted to clarify our current practices where fees are assessed. So there's an obligation, or there's an entitlement under the law in certain circumstances to assess fees. There often are opportunities for the applicant to narrow their requests. So we may have an opportunity to limit the time frame of the records they're requesting, or the scope, or to provide key search terms. We wanted to really spell out and make it clear to people that we would reach out, or they can reach out to us to try to narrow it, so that if there's something that a way to say, oh, there are fees for this because it's going to take us a long time to assemble the records and review the records, there may be a way to narrow that, or either reduce the fees or to even eliminate them entirely. And then we put in language about cross-office collaboration and also consultation with public charters and operator-led schools if the request is directly pertaining to their employees or students or operations. We also added in, consistent with the new law that I mentioned at the outset, a provision for an annual report to be posted on our website that summarizes statistical information about our requests. So just to give the public a summary of that. And so those are the changes. We have been vetting these proposed revisions with city schools office stakeholders, and since these are really technical and based on recent revisions to state law, our proposal for an engagement strategy going forward is to request written feedback from organizational stakeholders and have feedback information sessions when requested. So this is just a summary of, we've had some information sessions with our operator-led school constituencies. We're in the process of scheduling some, and we will, after any feedback from the committee, reach out to a number of other groups for written requests, and if they would like to schedule an information session. So that was a really quick run through. I'm sure there are questions that Mr. Riley and I can answer at the committee's request.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Are there any questions for the Access to Public Records presentation we just saw? Great. Yeah, so oh, go ahead.
One question is how do we communicate with the community? You know, it seems like we have 5-6 people who are really on top of information requests and understand their purpose and how to access. And then we have a whole lot of folks that seem like they're continually asking us, like, how do I find more information? How do I get this? What's available? What's not? Is there any sort of an infographic or any kind of way to communicate to stakeholders who might be interested in partnering with us for positive reasons, to people who might have questions about their child and enrollment and the culture of the schools as far as sort of the statistical piece, that we could communicate to the community how, what, why, when, and where information can be accessed that might be meaningful in decision-making processes, sort of in a 360 picture.
All right, Josh, Chief, see if I have this. Commissioner James, we do that in 2 different ways, both a passive and an active approach. The passive approach is folks just simply come to us through our different platforms. They may send an email, and this is more likely than not, an email to communications@bcps or email address, and they simply ask. We point them either right towards the information, or we tell them what steps they'll need to access it, depending on the depth of their request. And then as we reach out to different organizations, as we promote different activities, we go through great pains to point back to our website. This information is available on our website. If you have a question, go back, use our search bar, and be able to find it. So it's a bit of passive and active communications. Maybe not an infographic. That's something that we can most certainly think about. But right now, it's just we handle the questions as they come in, and this seems to be an effective process for us.
And I just wanted to piggyback on that, there are numerous requests that come in where the information actually is up on our website or available. And so I think we have been getting better at really pointing to people to that. But also I think when the requests come in, thinking about, first of all, is there a place that we can direct someone where this is readily available in context? Or is this the type of information that shouldn't be available not just to the requester, but it may benefit the entire community to have it up on our website or otherwise accessible? So there have been requests over the period of time where we said, either in the process of responding afterwards, oh, that's a good piece of information that we should think about being proactively up there so the entire community can benefit from, and somebody doesn't even have to know about that Public Information Act request piece to find that information in a search.
Perfect, thank you. I just trying to figure out the ways that we can interrupt the narrative that we have secrets, that we keep secrets, that we're not, sharing and communicating. So thank you very much for that work. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I just had one question. In the document, it talks about sort of under definitions, and you go to G and it says general information documents. And there's listed a master plan. I'm just not sure what that is. Could someone describe to me what the master plan is, and have I seen it?
So I believe that, so that's been in there for a while. I believe that document is the ESSA plan, right? That goes out every year. So that's my understanding of that, but we can work to clarify that with the current lingo, just so we all know what that is.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful, because I was like, what is this plan? I want to know, do I have the plan? Do I can see it? But yeah, so if that's a plan, that would be great. Or any sort of other documents that are sort of associated with the master. I would love to sort of know what that is throughout. So yeah, and I think that was sort of my only question for that one. Great. Any other questions from anyone before we move on to the compliance reports? Sweet. Thank you so much, Josh and Andre, for that. Great. So we have 2 compliance reports, and just wanted to see if we have any questions. The first compliance report is on 3.01 on the sustainability plan. And so I wonder if there are any commissioners with questions related to the sustainability plan.
One of my noticings about both of these plans, Mr. Chair, is that neither of them have any metrics attached to them. And I know with the anaphylaxis, we haven't been in school, so that might be a really muddy, complicated. But what are our last 5-year trends or things like that is missing. And I think specifically around the sustainability plan, there's some great, like, if the folks in the public have looked on whether something is pending or implemented, but there's no meat around that. So, we say that we have, that we're doing professional development on environmental literacy. Where, when, for whom, how much is that we, offered one 15-minute YouTube that, in fact, teachers and students could log into, or is there a chain of developmentally incremental increases in rigor and content and spread and distribution. So it was disappointed to not see metrics again. And then my only other, and I've got a whole bunch of metric ideas if anyone wants them. But as far as modeling this policy at North Avenue, are we setting an example at North Avenue with recycling, with composting, with cleaning products, with educating the faculty and staff that are at North Avenue, and then pushing that out to supporting building and leaders in that work. So those are my initial big buckets on both. And then I'll listen to the rest of people's, and if my others aren't addressed, I'll chop back in.
Great. Did you want to, yeah.
Commissioner, I'm Joanna Pesunia. I coordinate our sustainability. Is this the proper moment to step in and
Absolutely.
some commentary?
Yeah, and Joanna, now that you're here specifically, like I was looking for how many green schools are still being green schools, and how many, you know, those kinds of things is really, so I'm happy to see your face here.
Yeah, so I have a very large Excel spreadsheet, which I would be happy to share with you that has that. And I think it's just been a balancing of like who is looking at the data and what level of detail to include. So we can certainly talk internally and reconsider what goes into the public report, because I do have a lot of information that goes into making those stoplight images, and that was a decision that we had made as a way to make it more manageable. But maybe that's too summary and we should revisit providing a bit more detail. So on that piece, I'd be happy to share that with you. On the question of education within North Avenue, I would say yes and no. You know, I think we're doing some things really well and we have room to grow. So it's a continual process of, you know, education and bandwidth of people, and sort of meeting people where they are and understanding what motivating factors may be for them. And I think this applies throughout the school district of, you know, why would somebody choose to engage in this behavior, or how does it affect their job, and why is it important, and how it may affect, you know, an individual's personal health. It may affect academic outcomes. It may affect retention. There's a lot of different ways that we can approach it.
So thank you, and I look forward to seeing that. Could you give us a little update on where we are with green schools? And I feel like I want to channel, you know, our good friend Commissioner Kashani, who did so much work in that area.
So we currently have 30 schools that are certified as Maryland Green Schools. That's a certification through a statewide nonprofit organization called MAYO, which is the Maryland Association for Environmental and Outdoor Education. And that is a process where schools need to do a very rigorous application, and they are then certified, considered a green school for 4 years, and then they need to resubmit again. So it's in perpetuity. Every 4 years, you need to resubmit. So we have a number of schools who had a 1-year grace period. So Mayo gave schools all an automatic extension last year. And we have a number of schools that are up for recertification this year. And I think that our number is likely to drop because we just have schools that don't have the bandwidth right now to be doing this work. We have some schools that say, well, we want to be doing this work, but why bother go through the certification? What do I get for it? And that is a valid question, because it doesn't come with any money. It comes with the kudos to be able to say you're a green school and a green flag, and some schools say that's not quite worth it. I believe it really comes with the benefits of having a whole school focus on this work, and it also can open up other grant opportunities for schools. So we are partnering with the City Office of Sustainability, with Carrie Murray Nature Center at Rec and Parks, with the National Aquarium, to provide support to schools in their preparation of their green school application. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And I think sort of just echoing, sort of just thinking about sort of like some of the metrics around sort of the numbers, as someone who seeing this for like the first time in this way, I was like, oh, I just had a lot more questions. And so I think from my perspective, having sort of a little bit of descriptors around sort of what those the red, yellow, and green actually mean would sort of be helpful to help orient sort of my thinking and sort of looking at these numbers or the diagram. But then I guess one question that I had specifically around the to some of this, I guess to some degree, it's similar to what Commissioner James was saying. Like, so how do I know like how we're moving and sort of what constitutes a movement to a next tier? Is there a quantity that has to be achieved? Is there a condition that needs to be met in order for those things to go? So I think that would be really helpful for me looking at this. But what stuck out to me was the food waste portion. And so I was interested in understanding if you could talk to me about, do we know how much food we're wasting? And could you talk to me about like if we have a plan in place, even if it's a you know, temporary, raggedy sort of, you know, off the cuff approach to addressing this, so that I can have a sense of what our cumulative sort of food waste situation is as a district.
Sure. So we have done some food waste audits at several of our schools where basically everything that's going into the trash goes into a bucket and then gets spread out, and figure out how much of that is recyclable, how much of it is compostable, how much is trash. And we can then try and extrapolate that to other schools, but we don't have a number of exactly how much food we are wasting. We know that it is a lot. So there are a couple of things that we are focusing on. The first is, or the first few are really sort of back of the house things. So improving our food ordering. So moving to electronic ordering systems so that individual managers can predict better about, well, this meal, you know, generally we need this much. And so to try and cut down on over ordering and over preparing. So that's one piece. The second piece is about presentation. And that is very important. We know that if you put out a whole orange, many fewer of them are eaten than if you slice them up. So making the salad boat look pretty really has big impacts, which is true for all of us, right? Like that happens with me as well. So it's not just kids. And then we have the sort of front of the house piece about what kids take. And this is maybe a combined piece, which is offer versus serve. So there are certain rules about what every kid has to take, but sometimes that's not always understood. So kids may be told that they have to take certain items, and sometimes that may be the case, even if they know they're not going to eat it. And other times they may not have to take that item and not have to waste it. And then there's the recycling and composting side. And honestly, we have a long way to go on that front. The recycling right now across the district we're having a lot of trouble because the City Department of Public Works is very short-staffed. And so they are not being able to pick up our recycling consistently. In the cafeteria, it's very difficult to recycle, honestly. Like you really need kids or adults standing at every single set of trash bins and recycling bins. And then composting, we're in a lot of conversations with the City of Baltimore, with the National Resources Defense Council. We've gotten some small grants. Two issues there. One is that separation and education side. And the second is, even if we could do all of that, there is not a facility that can handle all of our waste right now. So the state is really struggling and working to bring more facilities online that can handle the amount of food waste that we would generate.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. Had not understood the scope and the magnitude of this portion. And are you aware of any sort of, do we have any partnerships where, I think right now COVID taught us that like we know how to stand up a space where folks can get meals and sort of like, you know, and sort of give into them even if they're not sort of in the building itself. Do we have any partnerships that are sort of able to take some of the food, particularly the pieces that are not, you know, or sort of eaten, or to sort of give into, you know, get them directed to sort of families and
yes.
That need.
So, well, that is something that I'm beginning to go beyond my knowledge level here, and so I can refer you to Liz Marchetta and her team in Food and Nutrition Services. But that is something that we have also tried to figure out, whether it be share tables, food rescue. So when there are large amounts of food, trying to get them to the right people while following all health department rules. So it's in progress, but we do not have a defined system in place at the moment.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Commissioner McFadden, did you have a question by any chance? And Commissioner James, if you have more questions, please.
Just a couple. John, have we looked into any, speaking along the partnerships, any agricultural partnerships for returning food waste for animal consumption as a revenue reentry possible line?
Yes, we have been in some discussions with a hog farmer about possibly collecting some of our waste and using that as feed. And she was actually collecting a lot of waste from the farmer's market. And so we were trying to figure out if we could piggyback onto that. We have not been able to figure out all of the logistics and the details of that right now, but that has been a possible route for us.
And then another big question. So do we have any great news about styrofoam and how that, even though we're sort of in this in and out, and then thinking about the idea of solid waste around food production and distribution. During COVID, one of the things that happened is that everything got sealed in a plastic bag. Do you know if there's plans to look at corn fiber plastic that composts? What are our safety precautions or challenges that the board might need to be aware of that your office is experiencing related to moving the sustainability agenda forward and also providing, the personal protection for touch and things like that?
Yes. So on the piece of styrofoam, styrofoam has been banned in the city of Baltimore, and we had already moved away from styrofoam trays and containers and things prior to that. There is also now a bag ban in Baltimore City. So use of plastic bags is restricted. So just earlier today, actually, as part of the procurement agenda at the operations, there was a piece about procuring both compostable and non-compostable wares for food and nutrition services. So some items we have not been able to keep them as compostable, and other ones we have. And unfortunately, none of our items are being composted right now, even when we are using them in the cafeteria. But our philosophy is that they are healthier, and that since the majority of our trash goes to the incinerator and is burned, that it is better to burn a corn-based product or a paper-based product than a petroleum-based product, and that in turn has reduced emissions. And so therefore there's value in making that step, even if we are not able to compost in-house.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for this work, keeping it happening.
Thank you for your support and interest.
With everything else going on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And sort of our other compliance reports was around sort of the anaphylaxis, the EpiPens, and any sort of thoughts or reactions. I know Commissioner James, you had mentioned a few. Yeah. Yeah, I think sort of just on this particular piece, I was just interested in, because it's thin, and hard to understand the sort of the scope and the magnitude, but I was trying to figure out in this particular compliance report, is there a space, like, I don't know, like, how long does an EpiPen last? Like, how often is it sort of, are we being recycled? What's the cost to that? I'd love to hear a little bit more specifically about any of those things if anyone's on the line to help me understand what might be going on.
And as they're logging in addition to that, how are we supporting students in ensuring that they're getting, whether it's their EpiPen or their whatever other meds that may have been distributed at school or housed at school as we go in and out of virtual and in-person learning?
Yeah.
Dr. Fink, is that you?
Sorry, I think she was there in the background just a minute ago, so I'm just texting her to see if she's coming back.
I thought I was unmuted, and I muted myself again. Please excuse me.
Okay.
All right. EpiPens are provided by the Baltimore City Health Department, and they are in all the health suites. There was also a significant number of EpiPens that are brought in by students whose doctors have prescribed them, and they are also stored in the health suite with their emergency recommendations. So the ones that we store are for an unexpected anaphylactic reaction where a student has not had something happen earlier, but all of a sudden they're in the middle of an anaphylactic reaction. Question about medication is that medications are stored. They're not stored from year to year. They're maintained in the health suite, and they're maintained under the orders from the doctor to administer them. And that's where they are. And if the student has orders from a doctor that requires medication, then those medications and those orders are in the health suite. For some students who require a much more extensive involvement with their, we do have private duty nurses who work with them to make sure that they get the treatment that they need. We also provide a training program for recognizing anaphylaxis and making sure that coaches and people have the proper equipment for people who are out on the playground or places like that, or the ball field or whatever else it is. And in many schools, as you may see from the report, we'd also provide a separate table or separate places where people could be who have known anaphylactic reactions. And our food and nutrition department, as you were just discussing some of the sustainability with, are really wonderful about providing menus for students who have different kinds of needs and making sure that they get what they need for lunch without anything in them that is going to cause an anaphylactic reaction. I don't know if I covered all your questions, but.
Yeah, so Dr. Fink, I had a particularly around sort of like how, like, I know it sounds like you said we're holding in the health suites sort of EpiPens or for students or for people in the building who had not had prior sort of medical exposure to those. So how often are those rotated out? Like how long do they last? Is it like a 5-year thing? And then so I just want to get a sense of like sort of what that really looks like.
They come in with an expiration date on them, and whatever the expiration date is from the company that's supplying them is honored. We do not rotate them back out around. When that expiration date happens, they're out. And we replace them as needed. Students who are bringing in EpiPens or other kind of medication, we will send the medication back at the end of the year. We don't keep medication over from year to year.
And the piece around that Dr. asked around sort of like when we're going between sort of COVID-19 in and out of schools, like when if a school has to go on lockdown, does the medicine get automatically sent home to the kids? And how does that, do you have a sense of how that's happening?
For the most part, most parents have one prescription they leave in the school and another prescription at home. For most medications, if most of the students are getting any kind of regular medication, there's a bottle that stays in the school and a bottle that stays in the home. One of the things, unfortunately, with so many of our parents is, of course, that they are poor and they are on Medicaid, and that provides for them to have that prescription and have that prescription at home as well. It would not be a good idea for kids to be taking the medicine back and forth between home and school. I hope we don't go back and forth anymore, because this has been a very trying year for everybody.
Yes, yes, it has. Yeah. Any other questions for Dr. Fink for this compliance report? All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Fink, for jumping in there. And if there are no more questions, I will begin to close us down. Christian, am I forgetting anything? We didn't have anybody signed up
Dr.
for.
Fink.
Yeah, thank you.
We did not have anyone sign up, no.
Okay, great. And so as we begin to sort of wind down this particular sort of policy meeting, I just want to say a big thank you to all of the staff for city schools who have consistently shown up and done some incredible, amazing, wonderful things in a very complicated and hard time. From myself, and I'm sure from all the rest of the board members, commissioners, just wanted to say a big thank you and hope that you all have an incredible, restful holiday season. Our next policy meeting will be January 18th, 2022. We will be sort of looking at student organizations. There will be a discussion about JJA. And then also looking specifically at the policies that will potentially be impacted by the Kerwin Commission. Just a reminder to the public that all of our meetings are open and we encourage everyone to attend. And if you would like to sign up in advance to speak for public comment, you can do that before the beginning of 9 a.m., beginning at 9 a.m. on Thursday before the meeting until 5 p.m. the Monday before the meeting date. You could contact our board office. Our number is 443-984-2000. or email us at schoolboard@bcps.k12.md.us. And with that, thank you so much, Christian and Tanisha and everybody in the board office. We appreciate the work that you've done and continue to do this year. And I hope you all have a beautiful holiday season. Okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.